Hello, this is Randy Moon. I'm the pastor of the Church of the Redeemer, located outside of Selma, California. I'm coming for the purpose of recording the Wednesday night Bible study that we have every Wednesday evening at the church. We are in the process of studying through the book of Judges, and this is our fourth study. I'm beginning with Judges chapter 2 and verse 16. I've entitled this that God raised up the judges. Again, Judges chapter 2, beginning with verse 16, we read, "Then the Lord raised up judges, who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them." God's action of raising up judges is a demonstration of the grace of God. But what is grace? Well, basically, grace is the unmerited favor of God, or the undeserved favor of God. The actions of the people during the time of the judges only deserved to receive God's punishment and his wrath. God's action should have been to tell the people, if you are not going to allow me to be your only sovereign Lord, then you can live life on your own terms and figure out what is best for yourselves, and I will not bother with you anymore. There have been times in my life that I have encountered people that I have attempted to be of assistance to, but I have come to realize that they really didn't care for my help. My natural reaction after I've realized people really don't want my help is that I won't have to bother with you anymore either. You can do it on your own. But the amazing aspect of life is that I have two adult children, and I've never been able to totally cut them out of my life, even when they would not listen to all of my good advice. I continually extend grace to them, unmerited, undeserved favor when they come requesting help from me. God allowed the people of Israel to experience the natural consequences of their actions of following after the foreign gods around them. But when the people of Israel would cry out for help, God would raise up another judge to deliver them out of the mess that they had created for themselves. God desires to be the only sovereign God of his people. This includes God desired to be the only sovereign God to the people of Israel during the time period of the judges. The sovereignty of God is the recognition by his people that he alone is the only supreme power of the universe. The sovereignty of God is the recognition that he is the supreme power and is completely superior to all other gods or idols or aspects that we think are helpful to us in our society. The problem for the people of Israel throughout the book of Judges and many other parts of the Old Testament and even some New Testament Christians is the lack of recognition of God as the only sovereign, supreme, superior power of the universe. It is from God's sovereignty that he extends his grace to us. We receive his grace because he is sovereign. The people of Israel did not listen to the judges that God had raised up for them. The people heard, but did not listen. It is possible to hear and not listen. Have you ever had someone ask you, "Did you hear that?" And you go, what? Possibly your spouse has asked you, "Are you listening to me?" Sometimes we get ourselves in trouble. I've learned of recent that if my wife is talking and all of a sudden I realize, I'm not paying attention, I have learned it's best to fall on my own sword, to tell my wife, "I'm sorry, I wasn't paying close attention. Tell me again what you were saying," long before she ever has a chance to ask me, "Are you listening?" It is possible to hear sound, but not allow the synapses of our brains to connect to hearing and understanding. The sound waves do little more than strike our eardrums, but we do not allow our brains to process the sound into our understanding. Thus, we hear without listening or understanding. The result of not listening or understanding God is that people turn away from God. In fact, verse 17, as I've already read, stated this: "They prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them." They did their own thing. They decided what they thought was best for themselves. They did not obey or follow the precepts of God. They hardened their hearts towards the things of God. When the people did not listen with understanding, they forfeited the grace that God desired to impart into their lives. And this caused them to only have the natural consequences of their actions to begin to take effect that they did not want or desire. These things were released into their lives. It's interesting. Verse 20 and 21 speaks of this nation. Let me read those two verses. Judges 2, verses 20 and 21. "Therefore the Lord was angry with Israel and said, because this nation has violated the covenant I laid down for them, or for their forefathers, and has not listened to me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died." Now, the reference to the kingdom of Israel as this nation, verse 21, because this nation has violated the covenant. This nation has a stronger meaning in the original language. The English language of this nation does not have a strong context as this nation has in the Hebrew language. This nation in Hebrew has a strong reference to the Gentile nations around the Jewish people. From an Old Testament concept, the people of Israel had a simple understanding of the world in which they lived. And their simple understanding was simply that one was either of God's people, of Israel, the chosen, or one was a Gentile, a cursed people from God's perspective. Now, God normally refers to his chosen people as my people. Let me just quote a few references of the Old Testament as proof of this. Exodus 3, verse 7. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. Leviticus 26, verse 12. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. 2 Kings 6:13. I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel. 1 Kings 17:9. I will provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. A passage I think we quote often in church, 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sins and will heal their land. Psalms 78, verse 1. O my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. Notice that God did not say in this passage of Judges chapter 2, verse 20, he did not say, because my people has violated my covenant. No, rather God said in Judges chapter 2, verse 20, because this nation has violated my covenant, in reference to the people of Israel. There is a strong implication that God was stating that Israel was not behaving as my people. The people of Israel were behaving as Gentile nations, as sinners, as cursed people. If the people of Israel will not hear, listen, and obey, then they were no longer God's people. God used the Gentile nations that should have been driven out of the land of promise to punish his disobedient people. The Lord used the Gentile nations to test the people of Israel. God never desires to allow punishment upon his chosen people. God always desires and looks for a heart of repentance. Going into chapter 3, the first 4 verses, we see the need of warfare. Let me read a couple of these verses. Judges chapter 3, beginning with verse 1. These are the nations the Lord left to test the Israelites who had not experienced any of the wars of Canaan. He did this only to teach warfare to the descendants of the Israelites who had no previous battle experience. Verse 4, they were left to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the Lord's commands, which he had given their forefathers through Moses. God desires the best for his people. There are certain lessons that all God's people must learn as they experience life with God. But the ability of God's people to hear, listen, and obey often determines the situations of life that we will face. Let me give an example. I have 2 adult children who are great examples of this spiritual truth. Now, my son is a good man, but his course of learning in life and many of life lessons were more difficult. The course that he took, the path he chose to travel was more difficult than the one that my daughter chose to travel. My wife and I spoke many truths into both of my son's life and my daughter's life. But my son chose to ignore what we spoke as he attempted to live life on his own terms as a child and as an adolescent. He received a fair amount of punishment and a loss of privileges because of his poor choices. He did learn his lessons. As I said, he's an adult now, and he admits he should have listened and obeyed as both a child and as a teenager. But my wife and I spoke these same truths into our younger daughter's life. And she listened and obeyed as she observed the situations that her older brother had to endure. She received far more privileges and less punishment because of her choices. God desires for us to learn important lessons in life, and our reaction to what God places before us often determines how we learn those lessons. The people of Israel during the time of the judges learned most of their lessons through the need of continual warfare. There's this concept of a holy war. And this concept is foreign to most people living in Western societies in the 21st century. Western society struggles today with the concept of Hamas and the Houthis and Al-Qaeda and ISIS of the Muslim faith. These groups often desire to destroy the infidels of other religions. Now, I by no means am an expert in this area, but I'll do my best to explain it to the best of my ability. Let me read a little bit from a commentary that I think does a fairly good job of explaining this concept. This commentary states, the people of the ancient Near East, including the people of Israel, not exclusively of them, but including them, had a concept of holy war, which viewed human enemies as their God's enemy. Human beings were not just killing other human beings, but they were destroying those who opposed their God. The people of the ancient Near East were not a peaceful people, and they practiced the concept of holy war, including the people of Israel. This explains the concept of Hamas and the Houthis and Al-Qaeda to our Western society. But how does this explain the concept of the Bible? How do we as New Testament, New Covenant Christians, how are we to understand the Old Testament, the Old Covenant ethics? This is not an easy question to answer. I know many years ago in Bible college, I attempted to do a research paper to attempt to answer this question, and that research and that lengthy paper I wrote along with a presentation to one of my classes at that time should have made me an expert, but I am by no means an expert in this area. Again, let me refer to the commentary that I read from a moment ago of how does one attempt to destroy one's God by destroying a group of people. The commentary states, this does not validate genocide or injustice, but suggests that God, for whatever reason, worked within a particular historical, theological context, taking people from where they were and then moving them beyond where they were. Throughout the Old Testament, God continued to reveal more and more of himself and his ways until he ultimately revealed himself in Jesus, who was the perfect revelation of God and who revealed some things about God that superseded earlier ideas that people held about God. So, this is not the last difficult question that we will consider as we study through this book of Judges. In fact, our next study, we're going to go to the back of the book of Judges. We'll come back to chapter 3 and work through the other parts later on. But our next study, we are going to turn our attention to the final 5 chapters of the book of Judges and the book of Ruth. These final chapters tell of 3 stories, 3 incidences that again are difficult for New Covenant, New Testament Christians to comprehend. These stories happened early in the time of the Judges. There's a tendency that you read through the Judges and you think the final thing that happened were these 3 stories. No, that's not right. These 3 stories happened early and into the middle time of the Judges. And we want to, first of all, get a view of what life was like as we begin to consider the time of the Judges. These stories illustrate the struggle the people of Israel had in attempting to live their lives that they had been called to live for God. These stories help us understand the manner of life that the people lived and their struggle in living a godly life. Interesting, in these final stories, there's a phrase that is repeated 4 times in these final chapters of the book of Judges. This phrase we see in Judges chapter 17, verse 6. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Then Judges 18:1. In those days, Israel had no king. Then Judges 19:1. In those days, Israel had no king. And then at the very end of Judges, chapter 21 and verse 25. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. I do not believe that simply having a king was the answer that the people of Israel needed. Even after the death of the great King David, we see that there were some various kings of Israel that did evil and led the people into doing wrong in the eyes of God. But yet the writer of the book of the writer of the book of Judges believed that a king would possibly be the answer that the people of Israel needed. The truth of the matter is that without godly leadership, people have a strong tendency to do as they see fit in their own eyes. My prayer is that God will give us godly leaders who proclaim the truth of God's words to lead the people towards a righteous lifestyle that is pleasing to God. God bless you until next week at our next study.